Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to part 2 of the Node intro series on Velocity 360, where we create a simple site where users can log in, sign up, sign out, things like that. And like I said in part 1, this is not going to be a full project. This is going to be a very simple Node-based project, so no React, where we show how to use Node at a basic level, mostly to serve as a prerequisite for the more advanced projects that I'm going to post coming soon on this site. So check out velocity360.io for other projects, and yeah, check back soon for that. So let's get started. Okay, so in the last video, we set up an API route handler to manage the CRUD operations of a profile, but we don't even have a profile data type at all in the backend on the server. So let's set that up. So what we want to do is we're going to set up what's called a schema for the database to handle, and that schema is going to be called profile. In order to do that, we need to install what's called an ORM, Object Relational Mapper. I believe that's the acronym, but let me just really confirm that. There we go. So what is an ORM? An ORM is basically a module, a helper that translates your code, the code that you write, so we want to use JavaScript, into the database language. So for us, that's going to be Mongo. The important thing to recognize there is that the database doesn't run our code. It doesn't run JavaScript. It runs its own query language. And it's not a software programming language, it's a query language. You may have seen some SQL commands that look like that, like select star from whatever. This is the query language. Um, since we don't write raw queries inside of our code, although you could, it would just be kind of strange. We want to write JavaScript, which performs those queries. However, the ORM has to then translate those queries into the query language for the database. So that's the important thing to recognize there. So, and we're going to have to install a module called Mongoose. So go back to your terminal, which is going to be our ORM. It's going to handle our database operations for us, the reads and the writes. So Mongoose is going to manage that for us. And then what we want to do is import Mongoose into our app.js. And then go back to your terminal. And now we want to set up a folder to manage the models, the database schemas. So create a new directory called models, cd into it, create a new file called profile. This is going to be our profile schema. What's a schema? It's simply a file that determines the characteristics of a data type. So we're creating a profile schema. So right now we want to determine what characteristics constitute a profile. So for us, it's probably going to be pretty simple, like email, password, and username, and that's it. If you want to make another schema called, called team, let's say you're making a project for managing baseball teams. You're going to want to have a schema called team, and it's going to have the schema is going to have name, city, players, a list of players, record, things like that. So here we have a profile schema, so let's set it up. So we need to import Mongoose here as well, because Mongoose is our main translator to the database, and then we want to set up the profile schema. So right away we're using Mongoose, and it's a schema, and then inside here we set up all the characteristics. So what do we say? Email and password. For now, let's go with just that. Now inside these characteristics, these attributes, we have to determine what kind of data they are. So data types break down to a number of categories. Most common are string, number, array, things like that. So an email is just a string. And the default value is going to be empty string. Same thing for password. Okay, and for now, let's go with that. And let's wrap it up by Mongoose model. Whoops. Okay. And this completes our profile schema for now. Obviously, it's very, very primitive, but we will be adding to it later. But this is how you create a schema in Mongoose. So actually, I'm going to add one more right now called timestamp. Timestamp is simply when the specific object was created. So when a user signs up on this site, we want to record when that exactly happened. It's just good information to have. I generally include a timestamp in literally all of my schemas because really, why not? It's just good to have. So that's not a string, that's a date object. Date is a special data type in JavaScript, and we want to default it to now. So basically what this means is that as soon as the user signs up, he or she will be assigned a timestamp immediately, and it will never be able to change. So the timestamp is not a mutable object. Mutable means changeable. The timestamp is not mutable. It's going to be set from the beginning and never change. It's kind of like your birthday. When you were born, that's your timestamp, and you can't really change that. Although people like to lie about that, but that's a different story. So anyway, let's go back to this. So we have our schema, and now we want to set up a way to fetch profiles. So if you go back to your API.js, first thing we want to do is import the profile schema so that we can use it. What am I doing? That's all wrong. There we go. Okay. So now we have the profile schema inside our API handler. So what we want to do is fetch all the profiles in the get command just to see if this even works. So the question is, how do you run a fetch command? So we want to do profile.find. Okay. So right away it's starting to get a little involved here, but just follow along closely, and I think you'll be able to make sense out of all this. Right here, we're running a find function on the profile schema. What's important to recognize here is that we didn't write this function inside the profile schema. There's no function in here called find. So an important question is, then how do we have access to it? Theoretically, this shouldn't be possible. Well, the reason is because we're using the Mongoose ORM, and our profile schema is really a Mongoose schema that inherits a series of other functions, among them being find. So right away, Mongoose is paying dividends. We're able to make a database query. This is a database query using JavaScript instead of the MongoDB query language, or SQL, or Postgres, or whatever database the project entails. So here, we're running a find function, and we're just fetching all the profiles in the backend. So this is the callback function right here. That's a function that'll run when the fetch is complete. And basically, that when the fetch is complete, there are two possible outcomes: a set of results or a failure. Something went wrong, right? If something went wrong, you're going to get this back, the error object. and then this will be empty. This will be null. The opposite scenario means nothing went wrong. This will be null, and this will be populated. So if there is an error, actually, I'm going to hold off on that for now, just for simplicity. We're going to assume it's successful every time. So what we want to do is respond. Okay, so right now, we're just assuming it's successful every time, which obviously is not very safe, but we're gonna take care of that in a second. So when the profiles return from the backend, from the database, we're just going to take our response from the route here and return a JSON object with a success confirmation and the results from the database. So if I go back here and run the server, actually this won't work right away. There's a key piece of information I forgot. So let's not even bother testing it. Right now, although this code is valid, the entire project is not hooked up to any database. And so this query will break down for that reason. So what we want to do is we want to hook it up to the database by going to the app.js and running, let's see, creating a database URL, Mongo DB localhost profile sign up. Okay, so first thing we're doing is we're creating a database URL. What does that mean? So a database runs on a separate server from the web server. So we have a web server and we have a database server. The database server is literally another server, which means it has its own address, its own IP, its own environment. And we need the URL to that database in order to connect to it. And this is going to be the URL for our local database, our database on our computer, which we're going to run locally. However, when we deploy, we have to change this to the live database, the actual database server, which I'll show you how to do when we get to that point. But for now, we're running everything locally. So now we want to tell Mongoose to connect to that database at that URL and give us the callback. And if there is an error, we're just going to run a console log, basically a print command, saying DB connection failed. So something went wrong. However, in the converse, we'll say DB connection established. That means it worked. Okay. So now if I go back to my terminal and run nodemon, you're going to see that we get the failure message. Failed. That's because I'm not running a local database. So there is no database to connect to right now. So I have to open a new tab by doing Command T and running MongoD. And that's going to run my local database server. So you want to see right here. That's what you want to see. I don't know why it took so long. But this line right here is the most important one. That's the one that's saying database is running. You're all set to go. So now I want to go back to my web server and run nodemon again. And I should see success. Right? So now my project is connected to my local database, which means I can run queries. So if I go back to my API file, this should now work. So if I go to localhost 3000, right, this is the home page. So far so good. If I do /API, here is the results set from the database right here. Whoops, right here. So it's giving me 2 brackets. That's an empty array. So basically it's giving me a list of nothing, which if you think about it, that makes sense because our database is empty. We didn't create any profiles. So this is a successful query. So if you recall though, we did not handle any errors. So we want to take care of that. Otherwise things can get really screwy in the debugging process. Okay, so here, if there's an error, I'm returning a failure confirmation with the error object populating inside the message key. So this is a pretty, pretty standard way of handling an error. Just return a failure confirmation and some sort of message indicating what might be wrong. So here, what I can do is I can try to induce an error by turning off the the database server, excuse me. So I killed the database server by doing Control-C. And if I go back to the web server and run nodemon, I'm going to get this initial message, which is what we expect. But if I try running a query anyway, oh, it's just hanging. All right, so never mind that. But in any event, here, right here, we're handling any kind of error that may occur from the database. So that's always good practice. If there's an error, you want to check for that first, and then make sure that you properly handle it, and then consider the success block. So this is very standard sort of callback structure. Check the error, do good error handling, and then check the response. Check the payload, the main thing, and return the success block otherwise. So far so good. What we want to do next is have actual profiles to look at, right? So right now we're fetching profiles, but they don't even exist. So it's kind of like there's nothing to look at. It's kind of pointless. So in the next video, we want to set up a way of creating profiles, basically a very simple sign-in, sign-up, and then we should be able to fetch those profiles in these queries. So let's go ahead and do that in the next video. Thanks for tuning in. For more tutorials, check out velocity360.io, where I'm putting up a couple new tutorials a week. And these are all Node, React, React Native. And right now what I'm doing is I'm preparing a series of intro tutorials, very basic tutorials for Node and React, so that when I start posting more advanced tutorials, users will have a foundation to work off of. So if you're new to React, you might want to check out this tutorial right here, where I use React to query the Foursquare API. And it's good for a good intro to React and Redux. And like I said, this is a pretty beginner tutorial, so it's good for just starting out. And it's setting up the foundation for the more advanced stuff I'm going to post probably in the next couple weeks. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and catch you in video 3.